All right. So routing. Let me set the expectations a little bit first. So I'm from Bluefront. I'm a front-end consultant focused mostly on JavaScript and architecture. And we all work with React. And what we do in React is we build component trees. And my talk is focused on how do we wire all those component trees together and make a application. And there's nowadays a lot of fancy router frameworks out there. Like there's Aurelia Angular, there's React routers, lots of stuff. And I've taken basically a look at all of them and concluded that they all provide the same features in one way or another. But the APIs are a bit overwhelming, and I've struggled a while with finding the right use cases for certain APIs. So that's what I'll do today. I'll give you a couple of use cases and tell you how I use certain APIs to solve certain problems. So let's talk about the problems. First of all, so I am right now in an enterprise environment. That means like a big product with lots of people working on it. So the challenge already is quite like, okay, so how do we distribute all this work among all the different people? Preferably we have them working in parallel. And there's this balancing act always between standardization, but you also want people to have a bit of freedom, or you don't want rules to slow people down. So it was like the problem mostly that's processes, right? And the other, I've got 4 more problems, and those are more like UI problems. So one of them is, so we're a hybrid app. An app means certain expected navigation on mobile devices. And we heard that in the near future, this app needs to also move to a desktop. So it means 2 different expectations from one app. So on desktop, people expect to be able to deep link pages, bookmark pages, right? But on mobile, they expect this other pattern. That is, if you have like an overview, this is Gmail, and you click on one of your emails, you can swipe horizontally to go to the next email. You could do this a couple of times. And then this back button on the top left does not take you back like every single email, but takes you back up to the overview. So this is a pattern people expect on mobile, which is not something that is like a default feature of a web browser. Next problem is what we call stepping out. Basically means, so this is ing, where I'm like about to wire money to somebody, and there's this button over here that allows me to select someone from my contacts. So how this works usually is I first fill in some amount of money, so €1 in this case, and I'll select someone from this address book, excuse all the blurring, and then I choose a person, and then the €1 is still there, I didn't lose its state or whatever, and the person got added to the form. Next one is preventing navigation. This is Facebook, and if you type something into this text field and you click cancel on the left top, it will not navigate you away immediately, but will ask you to confirm that you want to lose your changes. And if you don't, you just click in the gray area, and then it will actually keep you in the state, so you won't lose your changes. And the last one is loading. Facebook again. So there's some artists here that posted something on my wall, and if I click the name because I want to see more, and Facebook communicates to me like we're loading that, and because I'm on the phone, sometimes that might take its time, but at least I get some feedback like we're getting it for you, and then at some point we get the content. In some areas of Facebook, it's done a little better than just a spinner, and they actually show you like something that already resembles the content you will see at some point. And then the transition is like slightly less extreme. So those are the problems, right? And in like a software engineering environment, I found out there's like 2 like stereotype problems. Most of them that you hear about are from the product. We want to fix a problem in our product so that our users will be happier. But there's lots of like underlying abstract problems, which has to do with the platform you're working with. So at our company, we decided, okay, so let's actually like sort of structure the teams based on that. So let's have like feature teams that just focus on the product. And then if at some point some abstract architectural issue starts slowing them down, we have platform teams who will focus on solving that one. So the feature teams can always focus on the product. And our goal recently was to provide the feature teams certain router-related APIs and recipes, and preferably recipes, not too many APIs, because APIs can easily be the wrong APIs, and then you have to support them like forever. So, but anyway, so give them something to hold on to, like, okay, how are we supposed to do our routing? How do we keep it all simple? But without getting like completely sidetracked by that. So we wanted to make, in a component-based architecture, we want to make the router the foundation of component-based engineering. And one of the things that I like always yell at like every company I've been at is we need to design for change. Because, for example, Angular might be cool right now. You have like lots of like component trees with Angular, and then at some point, some tiny area of your application, you might find out that Angular is not really that practical. You might want to try something else from it. So hypothetically speaking, let's say like we want to try React in an Angular company. It would be really amazing if this foundation of component-based engineering would support just starting small with that. Just do the experiment first and then learn from it. And then once you know, like, okay, we're happy or we're not happy. If you're not happy, you get back to Angular. If you're happy, you start expanding with React. And I started thinking, like, how can you do this? Like, if the router is supposed to become the foundation, how do you make it do that? And one thing that Redux does really well, I think, is it's just a JavaScript library. It doesn't depend on React and it doesn't enforce React. What they have is several libraries that they call the bindings. So there's React Redux, there's Angular Redux, there's Angular 2 Redux, Backbone Redux, more. And I found out there's actually a router that does exactly the same thing. Like overall actually seems quite inspired by Redux, but they also have like just this core which is written framework agnostic, and we have like a Redux layer, or we have a React layer, or a React Redux layer, or Angular layer, whatever you want. So I thought, okay, that might be a good starting point to pick something that has a framework agnostic core. One thing I won't do today is tell you to use a certain framework. There's not much point in doing that. So I'm going to focus on the patterns, and I might use Router 5 a couple of times as example, because I think it's a nice example. But in theory, because all these routers, they provide more or less the same patterns, you could swap it with React router, or Angular router, or whatever you like. Also, I will not really show any code, but I will focus on concepts. So just lots of boxes and arrows. So I talked about the 5 problems. Let's leverage the router to solve them. So enterprise environment. How the hell do we like make being enterprise easier by using a router? So what is an application? First of all, I at the moment see application like you have your component tree, which might be React or not, a state container, which might be Redux or not, and a router instance, which might be Router 5 or another router. I thought what is nice is that I see this consistency here, that they're all trees. Like you have component trees, you have reducer trees, and you have basically a route tree, like child routes and stuff. And if you take those 3 concepts and you isolate them and call that an application, and you give that a contract, like I expect it to be able to give certain input and expect certain output, then you've isolated certain responsibilities, both technically and conceptually. And just like you do with components and reducers and routes, what if you then compose again with the whole applications? That gives all sorts of interesting benefits. Like you can just, as you navigate through the application, like the parent application, and you load child applications, you can lazy load those. If you need some sort of shared API, you make services. And if we just take a look again at the team structure, so the responsibilities of the teams, the feature teams, they would focus on lots of child apps. And the platform teams would focus on the application shell, which is like the root app that loads all the other apps. Hybrid application. So URL routing is pretty standard, straightforward. We all know it in a way. So the URL is the source of truth, and it gets into your router and then goes to React components, or in between to a state container, and then that one goes to React components. And the nice thing about this is that it makes your app work with the browser history, so that your back button and forward button in the browser, they keep working the way the user expects them to. And then there's this like other thing that's called state routing. And what that is these libraries, they use the history API in the browser to add certain state in addition to just the URL. So that if you use the back and forward buttons, you do not only know which URL you're going to, but you also know like that there's like anything that you put in that state, you get it back as well. So you can use that to sort of know like where am I coming from, where am I going to. And that history-based hierarchy that I was talking about, you swipe through the emails and you click the up button, you expect to go back to the overview. You could implement that using state-based routing by giving every state an index, which is just some counter that you keep. You just start at 0 and do +1 every time the user clicks on something or something. And you give it also a parent index. So this is something that we actually had to create a little API to make this easier for the feature teams. So we have a couple of methods that we can have. So one is called go. It's like the standard thing. You click on a link and that will perform a go. What that does is navigates to the URL, inheriting the parent index from whatever it was on the previous state. And initially that will be undefined because nobody ever said it. And if you do it down, so like another method, we set the index of the previous state as the new parent index. So then the previous state becomes the new parent. And the last one is like the up method, which will, in the history, jump to the parent index, or like go like this is a simple calculation, parent index minus index, and then you will go back in history to that point that you specified as the parent. And like I said, like initially this is always like undefined. The user landed in some state because of a deep link. So what do we do if it's undefined? We just go to the home always. That's how it's always. And you can use this to implement this. I found out this is actually something in the Android spec. It's called like navigation with back and up. It's a pretty standard Android spec. And they also use the Gmail example. So that was, surprised how, it took a little thinking, but I found out this is a really way to keep it really simple. So stepping out. There's a thing called router outlets in some frameworks. Actually, I think Angular is the only one that actually calls it that. And what it means is like you have some component in your component tree, and you specify like, that's where I want the router to put that thing that the user wants to navigate to. And you have some components around it. So there's this idea, like in most routing frameworks, you can have sibling outlets. So what if we make like a main outlet and a modal outlet? So that means if you render something in the main outlet and then something in the modal outlet, that content which was in the main outlet will still be there, the state will still stay there. And we have some like APIs that's open in modal, and that will make like the distinction, like open it in that outlet instead of the other one. And coming back to the composite application architecture, basically say like this application needs to load there and that other one load in the modal outlet. And each application could like repeat that pattern. You just use outlets wherever you need. And the only thing that you share is basically a UI component that looks like a modal that you use to sort of make this modal outlet actually look like a modal. You could make it look like something else and it will behave similarly. And make it look like an actual modal. So preventing navigation, basically all router frameworks, also React in their components APIs, they have something called Lifecycle Hooks. And basically that means if you are at a certain route and you go to the next route, the previous one can say like, okay, I am allowed to deactivate or not, and the next one can say I'm actually allowed to activate or not. And some frameworks, they support like more. There's like several layers where you can sort of say like stop. And a really simple way to implement something like, I don't want you to navigate away if you have some sort of unsafe changes in your form, is to just have a Boolean return value in your can activate lifecycle hook that checks like, is your form like touched or not. But the most interesting one is they usually also support returning a promise, so that you can actually ask like the user like, what do you want to do, and then the user will say like, okay, I really want to continue and lose my changes, or I want to stay. And then you resolve the promise with whatever the user wanted. The last one, loading. So with the previous one, I thought like the can deactivate hook, that was pretty straightforward to me. Like that's what you can use it for. But then with can activate and activate, I was like I couldn't really find use cases for like where it would actually work well. But what I've seen people do a lot is use a can activate for authorization. So you return false if the user does not have access to certain content. And you use activate to actually load certain content, so that if content failed to load for some reason, even though you had access, then you still get rejected. But the problem is, if I'm here and I click on this guy's username, and the thing is doing anything in the background, like I don't see it happen. Like this app is totally unresponsive because the router is blocking the navigation until you say like, you're allowed to go. And it gets even more complicated, like conceptually. Like what happens if I tap on something, and the thing starts, it has a pending activation promise, and I'm like impatient, and like I tap on something else, you're like, okay, this thing's not responding, let's try something else. What does that even mean? Like you have two pending activations, which one is the most important one? Like they don't really necessarily resolve in the order that you started them, right? So this gets both technically and conceptually really difficult all of a sudden. And then all of a sudden I thought like, okay, let's just, let's move this out of the router. Because if you just let it through always, even if you don't have access or you don't even know if this content is going to load or not, you just render something, render placeholders. And then you start loading content, and then once that's done, you render the loaded content. And that will look like the user, expects. It will tell you like, hey, well, there was something, and now we succeeded. Or this is like almost what you want, and now it's really there. And even if it fails, you just, save that failed response somewhere in your state container or whatever, and you render something based on that. You render like, hey, something went wrong, and here's a button that you can click if you want to try again. So, recap, we use composite applications to make being enterprise a little easier. We use URL routing, state routing, and history API to implement this hybrid navigation concept. Router outlets to allow people to step out of the content, but without losing anything there. They can return at any point. Lifecycle hooks to prevent navigation. We deliberately avoided lifecycle hooks to load content because that makes the whole application seem unresponsive. So that was my talk. Thanks for listening.